as the policy director for a group called the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. I keep it a giant secret so nobody knows who I work for. Policy director is our fancy title. I'm a lobbyist. As the sheriff talked about, I spend my days when the legislature is in town, we call that in session, down at the Capitol, dealing with those folks that you all and others around the state elect to be legislators and trying to make good public safety policy out of it. That's the only part of public policy that I work on in my professional life. And I know we've got a few elected officials here. Of course, the sheriff. I got to go have burgers and an iced tea with two of my very dear friends. If you are an elected official here that I missed, would you two stand up and introduce yourselves as well, please?
I'm Mary Ann Nichols, Conroe County Auditor.
I'm Yomi, the Conroe County Clerk.
Nicole Dice, Conroe County Treasurer.
I'm Dolly Duncan, County Prosecutor.
I'm Robert Rosencrantz, one of the county commissioners.
Great. Thank you all for being here. Any former elected officials here? Any recovering elected officials? So thank you, each of you, for your dedication. Public service is often a thankless job. I will make it even more thankless by the time I'm done. But I have a deep amount of respect for elected officials. So I forgot my clicker. So here's the other thing. I hate giving speeches. I did not write a speech tonight. I wrote a presentation intending to engage you all about what I do for a living, how the policymaking process works, and how I influence that. If you all don't raise your hand, and if you don't engage in conversation, I'm gonna wrap this sucker up real quick. So if it gets real hot, just sit there and stare at me awkwardly, and we'll just call this done. So, and I also wrote the presentation to remind me what I'm supposed to talk about. So, let's see if we got, uh-oh. I think I may have let it sit too long. Okay. Hey, Casey, you come in. Okay, here we go, it's away. So, a couple of disclaimers, right? Every good presentation has disclaimers. I'm not your attorney. I'm not even an attorney. So if you take legal advice from me, you've gone to the wrong place. Oh, this just isn't gonna work at all. We'll do it the other way. Second, I don't give advice, let alone legal advice. So again, if you wanted legal advice, this is the wrong meeting for you. Oh, this is going great. What are you guys laughing at? So let me introduce my family now that it's awkward for everybody. This is my wife, Mandy. Mandy, stand up and say hello to everybody. My oldest daughter, Emma, who is 16 and a driver now, and Casey, who is our football playing, drumming tech guy, and Alice, the wonderful gal who led us in our national anthem. Okay, so, and this is entirely informational presentation, based on my experience, right? There's no legal information being given here. This is just what I know based off of what I do. You're entitled to a full refund. If you don't feel like you walked away with something, with information that is helpful for you. If you paid anything to get in here, you got duped. Second, feel free to raise your hand, right? But if you try to make the meeting about you, then you gotta go have your own separate meeting. This meeting is about everybody here. And finally, feel free to disagree with me so long as you acknowledge that I'm right. Oh, I gotta speak louder as well. So this is an overview of what we're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about how the legislature works, what a lobbyist is, about finding and tracking bills, how to influence the legislature, and then in the end, in case I run out of material and we still have more time, I have some fun legislative lessons that I have learned over the years. So we'll get straight into it. How the legislature works. If anybody is reminded of fifth grade social, are there any fifth grade social studies teachers in here? Okay, good. You'll be reminded of that. So we remember there are 3 basic levels of government, right? Federal, state, and local. The federal, this is like the President of the United States. The United States Supreme Court, Congress, federal agencies, federal courts of appeals, federal. The state, things like the governor, the legislature, state agencies, the state Supreme Court, state courts of appeals, things like the Washington State Patrol, Department of Corrections, state agencies, and then there's local. Things like the sheriff, the auditor, the clerk, the coroner, the prosecutor, the treasurer, county commissioners, your local school board, mayors, city council members, those sorts of things. Now you'll notice that there's a lot more examples in local because frankly that's where all the work is done, right? The money's at the federal level, the power is at the state level, the work is done at the local level. The state levels, that's the one we're going to talk about today. Now you'll also remember there are three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. We're talking about that one, the legislative branch at the state level. The legislature, and I underline these terms to highlight their distinction. The legislature, the body of the state legislature, is made up of legislators, each one elected among 49 legislative districts. This is a map of the legislative districts. Of course, the Seattle, Puget Sound area has a lot smaller districts than areas like this. The 7th legislative district, where you all sit, is the biggest geographic district in the state. You have 3 legislators, Representative Joel Kretz, Representative Jacqueline Maycumber, and Senator Shelley Short. 2 of those 3 are not seeking re-election. And so it's a time for change for you all here. Washington's legislature is what we call a bicameral legislature. 2 co-equal pieces of the legislative branch of government. The legislature, again, that whole body, the House, where there are 98 members, 2 each elected from each of the 49 legislative districts, and then there's the Senate, 49 senators, from 1 from each of those 49 districts. And again, you'll see that representatives, when we talk about a representative, that's somebody who's elected to the House. When we talk about senator, that's somebody elected to the Senate. So the legislature sets policy, public policy, through the enactment of laws. We call that statutory law. Now distinguish that from things like common law or case law, where the courts have an issue and they decide without any action from the legislative branch. And the legislature enacts statutory law through the adoption of bills, and that's also how they adopt the biennial budget that we run at the state. The legislature meets every year. We always start the 2nd Monday of January. That'll be one of those lessons that we talk about at the very end. Sessions in odd-numbered years, like this upcoming 2025 legislative session, are what we call long sessions. Those are 105 days long. That counts, we run through the weekends, we run through holidays. It's 105 calendar days. It doesn't matter what is on that day. And then in the even-numbered years, like the 24 legislative session, those are, we call them short. I'll tell you, they don't feel that short. They're only 60 days long because the legislature doesn't adopt a budget in the short sessions. They adopt a biennial, a 2-year budget in those long sessions, and then they tinker with the budget a little bit in the meantime. So we're going to talk about caucuses. Now we've gone out of the 5th grade stuff, and we're going to get right into the meat and bones about policy making at the state level. And frankly, most of this is true at the federal level. I hate working at the federal level, and so I don't like talking about it, and I don't do any of it. So here we're going to talk about caucuses as a noun. Later on, we'll talk about it as a verb, and I'll try to remember to make that distinction. So let's remember that representatives and senators, these are partisan offices. When you get your ballot, have the primary ballots mailed yet? So if your ballot isn't already on your kitchen table or your mailbox, it is en route. You'll notice that every senator and representative and many other positions on the ballot, but these are the ones we're talking about tonight, they've got a letter after their name, and you can still use parentheses, right? In between a parentheses, right? We all know that R means Republican, D means Democrat. Some people get creative with different party names, but you have to have a party declaration to file for one of these offices. So that makes a difference for those who get in that office because they start to become part of a caucus. Caucuses are the members of each political party, right? There really aren't anybody other than Democrats and Republicans that get elected to the Washington legislature. Years ago, we had somebody who ran as an independent Democrat. He was a Democrat. It sounded better for him. So, and there are 4 caucuses within the legislature, depending on which chamber you're elected to and which party you chose that you affiliate with. And people can change their parties if they want. It's pretty rare, but it does happen. There's the House Democratic Caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, the House Republican Caucus, and the Senate Republican Caucus. This will make a little bit more sense here in just a few minutes. So think of caucuses like a team, right? If we were to come out onto this gym floor and we were to pick captains and we didn't have an even number of people here, one team's gonna have more, and then if we were deciding, we weren't playing a basketball game, we were voting on stuff, whatever team has the most votes gets to make the decision. That's effectively the same way the legislature makes their decisions as a group. And so this is I'm very, very good with PowerPoint graphics, as you can see. This is about as fancy as it's ever gotten for me. There are 98 members of the House, all the blue ones, if I counted right. Those are the 58 Democrats, and the red ones, of course, are the 40 Republicans. And then the same thing for the Senate. There are 29 Democratic senators and 20 Republican senators. So we can see pretty clearly which team makes the decision in each of those chambers. Now, throughout the presentation, if I did this right, you'll see little pop-ups from time to time that I labeled an opportunity to influence. And so that fourth bullet that I put in there about what we're going to talk about tonight, the opportunity to influence, it's throughout this whole presentation. And here's one of them, right? That you have an opportunity, if you feel like the legislature doesn't listen to the things that affect you, that affect your community, your city, your county, your region, this is one way to influence that, right? Participate in your election. I'm not going to ask how many of you vote in every single election, but if you don't vote at all, I might encourage you to vote in more than you have in previous, because that is the most foundational way that we influence who makes decisions on behalf of each of us. So the caucus is in each chamber. So think of it like a team reports to camp, right? And they're going to strategize about what kind of plays they're going to do, whether it's a basketball game or a football game. They're going to strategize about what kind of plays, how they're going to play each team in their league differently. Caucuses effectively do that the same. Now, I'll get to it in a little bit. Most legislation passes the legislature in broad bipartisan support, meaning Democrats and Republicans both vote in favor of it. But sometimes there are things where partisan politics really makes a difference. And the basic makeup of each caucus and the pure numbers there, that decides who chairs each committee. And we'll talk about the committees and the chairs here in a little bit. It also sets the priorities for that body for that legislative session. It makes a big difference. Each caucus also has their own staff who are there just to work for the purposes of that caucus. Now, we'll distinguish that from what we'll call nonpartisan staff. There are nonpartisan staff who work for the body of the legislature, either the House or the Senate, and they don't care whether a legislator is Democratic or Republican or nonpartisan or an independent Democrat or anything of the like. But caucus staff do. The Republican caucus staff only work for Republican members of the House or of the Senate. The Democratic caucus staff do the same thing, and their positions, they will advocate on behalf of that caucus rather than, frankly, on behalf of the people of the state of Washington. Uh-oh. No, I just clicked something different. Okay, I think we're back in here. So I made this point already, right? While most bills are bipartisan, meaning they get support from both caucuses in each chamber, sometimes legislation can be partisan. And also there are plenty of times where fights aren't between Democrats and Republicans, particularly as we get toward the end of legislative session, where each chamber is trying to match up amendments to bills that have passed both chambers but in different versions. You'll see fights between the House and the Senate where Democrats and Republicans in the House are aligned with each other against the Senate, and the same thing, the Senate vice versa. So, bills. The legislature acts through the adoption of legislation. We will call it a bill. It's an easier word to say. Even the $71.9 billion biennial budget, yes, your state government spends more than $1 billion a week. There's also a $70+ billion combined transportation and capital budget that is not included in this. But everything they do is enacted through a bill, through legislation. And a bill can be introduced by any member of the House or the Senate. If a representative introduces a bill, it will be a House bill. A representative cannot introduce a Senate bill. And a senator can only introduce a Senate bill. They cannot introduce a House bill. And you'll see House bill is always abbreviated HB and Senate bill is SB. Every bill, this is an important thing for people who want to track or pay attention to legislation later on. Every bill is tracked only by its number. Now, how many of you, I know the two of you, with three, several of you, you've tracked bills and you get lost in the E2 SHB that don't worry about. You know what I'm talking about. Don't worry about any of that stuff, ever. Pay attention to the four numbers. Those are the things that's all you need to identify legislation and find the right thing that you're looking for. Those letters before, it helps us track a little bit about whether the bill's been amended and where it got amended. Unless you're paid to care about that kind of stuff, my advice to you, just don't worry. Pay attention to the four numbers. And you can even get some intelligence out of those four numbers. House bills always start with the number 1,000. And the first House bill introduced of a legislative biennium will be House Bill 1000. Second one is 1001, and off they go. Senate bills always start at 5,000. And 5,000 and then 5,001, and off they go. So if you hear me talk about, and I don't say House bill or Senate bill, I say Bill 6531. If you've been paying attention tonight, you know that that's a Senate bill, right? That you can get some of that out of there. And bills can be entirely identical. So let's say that tonight we decided we want to run a bill that requires this middle school to have really, really good air conditioning. And we went to Representative Maycumber and Senator Short, and we wrote a bill that says the middle school must have air conditioning if it's more than 40 degrees outside, because it's hot tonight. Senator Short could introduce a Senate bill that says that, and Representative Maycumber could introduce a House bill that says the same thing. But those bills, even though they're identical, they operate entirely independent of each other. There's a name for that. We call them companion bills. They at least start the same, but if one is amended, the other one doesn't automatically get amended. There have been companion bills that pass each chamber in the exact same language, but neither one of them becomes a law. One of them has to pass both chambers. You can't do halvesies and call it good. And a bill either, so here we're going to get into kind of how to read a bill, because this is important, right? There's no way that you can understand whether a bill is important to you if you don't know what it says. So a bill does three things. There's really a fourth, but I only put three on here. It creates a new section, and this is an example. Hopefully you all can read this. And there are a couple of clues that we can find when we see a part of a bill that creates a new section in law. The first clue is it says new section in all capital letters and it's underlined, right? And we call that a clue. But then you'll also see there's nothing in the text of that short paragraph that has any strike-throughs or underlines. And sometimes people mistake this of, well, that's just a part of law that they didn't amend. And the reality is that's a part of law that doesn't exist today, but it will if this bill is passed. A bill can also repeal an existing law or provision words within a section of law and make it read differently than it currently does, or it can insert new language into that. And you'll see that there's clues here, and we see that in the separate example. The image on the bottom, the language that has a strike through right in the middle of it, that means if this bill were to pass, those words would no longer be in that section of law. The words with the underline is just the opposite. If this bill were to pass, those words would now be included in that section of law where they're not today. There's a couple of the clues that I want to point you out to, and depending on how into this you want to get, so you can start taking notes here. So we see I don't know if you all can see this, I'm going to scoot over here. I got to make a giant U-turn. So you can see right here, a new section is added to chapter 43-101 RCW to read as follows. So our statutory law is organized into title, chapter, and section. So, and it's just a simple, it's an easy way for us to try to keep it all organized, because there are thousands of volumes of statutory law on the books today. So the title is that first number. Title 43, that's generally our executive branch of government. 43-101 is the title and chapter. Chapter 101 and Title 43, that's the Criminal Justice Training Commission. So somebody who knows, a nerd like me who does this for a living, I could just look at that and say, okay, this section tries to do something with the Criminal Justice Training Commission, something I know a little bit about. And that's helpful because we see, like right here, it says the commission. Well, it doesn't tell you what commission. There are dozens of commissions in the state, at the state level. But if we know whose chapter of law this section is seeking to amend, then we can get a better context without having to do a bunch of legal research in the process. And then again, this is the fourth thing that I talked about that a bill can do is we call them repealers, and that can repeal an entire section of law. That way the legislature doesn't have to go through and put a bunch of strike-throughs through that whole section, that whole paragraph of statute. Any questions yet? Anybody asleep? Did you have one? Oh. Somebody's paying attention, thank you. Okay, I forgot to do the handouts. Hey kids, will you come help me? Girls, where'd your brother go? Okay. So I brought handouts, and there are more than are necessary. It is a two-sided thing. Now, you don't have to study this, but hopefully it's helpful. If not, just ignore it. Make paper airplanes out of it. So on one side, you'll have the legislative history right off the legislature's website of a bill that I happened to pick from 2017. Oh yeah, down here, baby. From 2017, this is a bill about the crime of driving under the influence. Now, you don't have to pay really close attention to this, but to help you give some example of this, and we'll actually walk through a little bit of this bill. On the other side, the side with the green boxes, I stole this from the legislature's website. This is the age-old how a bill becomes a law, but they moved it. Who remembers the bill from Capitol Hill? Yeah, they've kind of moved away from it, but I'm trying to make it come back. So this is a bill, and generally I'll give you the cheat sheet for the green part, and you can actually see a little bit of it if you pay attention to the part with the Senate Bill 5037. So if you go way back to the old days, right, most legislatures either use Robert's Rules of Order. I think some people who've been in city council or county commission are generally familiar with. Our legislature actually uses Reed's Rules of Order, which is basically the same thing. Some of the points are different, and some of the priorities are different. But if you think way back in the day, before the legislature, well, frankly, even before the Washington legislature existed, before there were staff and laptops and things that legislatures could easily access, think way back in the day. If a lawmaker wanted to propose something, they would go through what they would call, and we still call today, first reading. So think again, way back in the day by candlelight, somebody would stand up probably with a wig on up front and this really weird accent, and they would physically read the entirety of what was surely a handwritten piece of legislation. Because nobody else in that body, let's say it's the House from way back in the day, nobody in there had read it before, nobody had heard of it before, they'd all just come to town. So they would do first reading. It's kind of like, let's give an idea about, let me skip forward. Let's give an idea about what it is that we're talking about. In this case, Senate Bill 5037, they would read it in its entirety, which parts they would strike in the law, which parts they would add, which part are new sections, which parts they would repeal. And that would give the chamber, right, the House or the Senate, the ability to, okay, I kind of understand what that bill's doing. And then they would take some time. Most reads of Robert's Rules of Order traditionally would say you got to wait at least 24 hours. Then the body can have, if it chooses, a second reading. If enough people say, yeah, there might be something to that, let's have the second reading. So they would read it again, and on second reading is when they would kind of refine the idea. How can we make it better? So in second reading is when they would propose ideas. Well, rather than making in this case, the fourth DUI a felony, what if we made the second one a felony? And then they could debate that back and forth, and they could do amendments, and they would perfect the bill in second reading. And then again, they would traditionally wait about at least 24 hours, let the ideas sink in, let people talk about it, and then they would come back for third reading, and that's when they would actually vote on the final passage of it, meaning we're ready to make this a law. Now today we have nonpartisan staff and partisan staff, and we have computers and all that kind of stuff. I'm clicking all kinds of stuff back here. And so we've really inserted a new part, and I'm going to consider it kind of a supplement to second reading, and that's the committee process. So we know that the state legislature can introduce bills about everything from water rights to property rights to what's criminal law to political parties, environmental stuff, taxes, health, all down, like there's virtually nothing they can't write a bill about. And so the legislature breaks itself up into committees to kind of help that process get along, because the 147 of them can only be experts in so many things. So we'll go back and we'll focus first on that first reading. So the very first step of every bill in first reading is somebody's got to have an idea. And that's frankly one of the awesome parts, one of the interesting parts about my job is, at least in the criminal law world, everybody's got an idea. Everybody. And it doesn't have to be a good idea. So, and then the idea has to come to a legislator. And the legislator has to be willing to introduce that idea as a bill. We call that sponsor a bill. And then if the bill sponsors a representative, we talked about this, the bill is introduced as a House bill, the bill sponsors a Senate, the bill is introduced as a Senate bill. And once a bill is introduced, the first reading part's automatic. And really that's the only free part that you get when you're influencing the legislative process. And those of us who are, I'm paid to spot these sorts of things, so I'll call them out to you. Here's an opportunity to influence. Have an idea. Have a thought about how your community, your city, your county, your state, your local group, whatever it is. I love this thing on the wall behind me. How can you help someone else today? That's what it says, right? Yeah. Well, what will you do for others? I was close. That's a great question to get started on an idea. So I talked about committees, and this is a list of the House committees and the Senate committees. And if you can read this, I had to make this text small enough so that it would fit together on one page. You can see that there's a lot of committees, and ironically, the jurisdiction of each of those committees is actually fairly broad. They consider a lot of stuff. And again, you can see just on the names of these committees, there's a lot of influence that the state legislature can have on our everyday lives and the things that we do. If you're wondering why a few of those committees are bolded and in green, they're what we call fiscal committees. These are committees that deal with budgets and appropriations, and we'll kind of touch on those just a little bit. So within a committee, the power rests within the chair, right? The committee chair is clearly the most powerful person in each committee, and every committee has their own committee chair. Committee chairs are always in the majority party. So right now, the Democrats control both the House and the Senate, so every committee chair is a Democrat. If the Republicans controlled the House, every committee chair would be a Republican. There have been very rare cases of exceptions to that in my career, but it is an incredibly rare thing. The committee chair establishes the agenda for that committee's hearings. The committee chair presides over the hearings when they do a public hearing. And so in establishing the agenda, I mean the committee chair decides what bills get allowed to have a public hearing, because those are not automatic. The chair decides who testifies, in what order, how long they get to testify for. The committee chair decides which bills get scheduled for what we call an executive session. That means the committee's allowed to vote on that bill. The committee chair presides over executive sessions, and they have considerable leverage over the other members of that committee and other legislators with bills in that committee. So, for example, if I sit on the House Justice, Community Safety, Justice, and Reentry Committee, and the sheriff also sits on that committee, and he's the chair of that committee, and I say, hey, sheriff, I really want you to, I've got this bill to establish that the middle school has to have air conditioning. I really want you to schedule my bill for a public hearing and vote it out of the committee. The sheriff hypothetically could say, that's great, James. I'm happy to pass your bill. I need your vote on these other bills, right? Some of that, what may be called horse trading, may happen from time to time in the legislative process. But the committee chair always still needs the votes. The committee chair cannot pass a bill out of their committee by themselves. They still have to have a majority, right? 50% rounded up, in order to pass a bill out of the committee. Committee chair can what we call kill legislation single-handedly. They cannot pass it out of their committee single-handedly. So again, there are a number of opportunities to influence this process here. One of them is that, again, the committee chair gets to establish the agenda. If I want a bill, the bill about air conditioning here, to pass in the 2025 legislative session, you can bet your tail that I'm going to be figuring out what committee that bill is going to go to, and I'm going to be talking to that committee chair now, saying, hey, you got a bill coming your way next session. I really need you to schedule for a public hearing because we were hot that night in the middle school. We also know that the committee chair decides what bills get scheduled for an executive session. Thanks, Cody. We know the committee chair decides that. So again, I'm going to be talking to that committee chair saying, hey, that's a really good bill. Make sure you schedule that for a public or for an executive session. What do we need to do to get you to commit that to me? And the opposite is true too, right? If I'm the person that really likes to sweat in the middle school on a Friday afternoon, I'm going to lobby against that bill. And I'm going to tell the committee chair, no. Don't have a public hearing on that thing. That's a terrible idea, right? We're going to have all kinds of people listen to this knucklehead talk about the legislative process if you allow air conditioning in there. So there's ways that you can both positively influence legislation and you can work against it all in the same process. There's another opportunity to influence because the committee chair has influence over other legislators, and you can play this game at a second or third hand level where it's like, you remember the telephone game, right? It's a little bit like that. Hey, Mr. Chair, Representative Blakesley doesn't want to vote for that bill that you really like, so let's get him to do, or let's require him to do such and such for this person and all the way circle it back around. It's a complicated game, but it's job security for people like me. And then this is also another one, right? Let's remember the chair always still needs the votes. There have been times that a committee chair introduces a bill that goes to their own committee. In fact, it's really common because it's a great strategy, right? You solve several of these things if the sponsor of the bill is the chair of the committee presiding over it. In those sorts of cases, I switch my tactics to the bottom. Chair can't pass their own bill with only one vote. And the chair's not going to come to me and say, James, you're right. This was a terrible idea. I'm a really terrible legislator. They don't do that. So you go get everybody else to decide to vote against it. It can be a dangerous thing, but politics is at least academically dangerous game. So lots of opportunities to influence this process right here alone. So in a committee hearing, this is a screenshot of the public hearing for the bill that you have on your sheet there. A bill gets referred to a committee, but it has to be scheduled for a public hearing. Not all bills get scheduled for a public hearing. In fact, most don't. A hearing is only necessary for bills that pass. And one of the few things that people don't recognize about the legislature rarely, very rarely, will they allow a bill to be voted on unless they know it has enough votes to pass and they want it to pass. Bills don't get brought up in the legislature to be defeated. There's about 5,000 bills introduced between the House and the Senate in a biennium, in a 2-year cycle, and there's only 147 legislators. They don't have enough time to vote against all the bills they don't like. They defeat them through inaction. But if we want to pass our bill, we need a public hearing. And public hearings are open to the public. Any person can come. Even people like me, I'm a paid lobbyist. I've been doing this for 24 years. I've been trying to influence the legislature. I haven't found the key to it yet. But I don't have a license. I don't have any special qualification. I just talk to people. And so I get to go. And so can you. And we'll talk about how you can do that. But this is a really big piece that a lot of people are intimidated by that process. Well, that's the legislature testifying in front of the legislature. They think it's like testifying in court. Not even close. Not even close. You don't get summoned, you just get to go. So again, here's an opportunity to influence. Now, one of the things that I've always thought of is after I'm done doing this, I'm not yet sure what I want to do when I grow up, but I know when I'm done doing this job, done working in the legislative environment, I'm going to spend an entire legislative session and I'm going to sign up on testifying every single bill that I can, especially the ones that I have no idea what they do. And I'm just going to go, because it happens, there are plenty of times where bills that I'm working on get derailed because somebody comes in and they thought, you know what, that's a terrible idea. And they politically blow up a bill that I'm working on that was very carefully alliances put together, and frankly, they get to do that. That's their right. That's your legislature. You're entitled to come and share your views, whether you know what you're talking about or not, whether your views are popular or not. That's the way this process is designed. And I encourage you, don't let those things pass up. Because frankly, if you sit on the sidelines and you wait till the legislature does something that you think is really stupid, all you have to do now is the opportunity to complain about it. But if you come up with those ideas, and I know everybody's got at least an idea, and you share it, and you get it in front of a legislature, and you can come share your reasons why in a public hearing, now you're contributing to the betterment of your community, unless it's a terrible idea in which you shouldn't share it with anybody. So this is, if you take anything away from this, take this website away from tonight, leg.wa.gov, ledge.wa.gov. Our legislature, to their credit, has by far, in my view, the best public-facing website of any state legislature in the country. I wish they did more, but they do way more than they have to. They don't have to do any of this, but it's a phenomenal website, and there's lots of places that you can get information. So, with committee hearings, so let's say we're back in 2017, 2018, whenever Senate Bill 5037 was passed, and you say, you know what, James, you're right. I'm gonna go testify on that bill. I think it should be a felony for a person to get their 4th DUI conviction in 15 years. Other than that, it's a gross misdemeanor. So I want to testify. How do I do it? I would in 2018 and today say, go to ledge.wa.gov and click on that, communicate with a legislator or participate in a committee hearing. That'll take you right here. There's lots of stuff that you can do here. The first one is click that link to testify in a committee hearing. This is how I sign up to go testify on bills. I testify in hundreds of them during each legislative session. Sometimes it feels like hundreds in a single day, but this is where I go, and that's the link that I click. You can, and in that you can testify in person. If you decide to make the trek over to rainy Western Washington, you can do that. Or now, since COVID, you can testify via Zoom. There are all kinds of people that still do that, especially from here. It's a great opportunity to take advantage of. The second thing, if you decide, you know what, James, I don't need to go up in front of the committee and talk to them. It's usually about 3 minutes is how long we get. I just want to, I feel more comfortable writing it down and giving it to them. Well, there's your link to do it. You can officially submit comments to that, and you can do it via this link. Or if you say, you know what, I don't want to tell them why I like or don't like a bill. I just want to tell them that I like it or I don't like it. There's your link, that third one. Get your position on a bill noted for the legislative record. You can do all those right there. Or if you don't have a particular bill in mind, let's just say you want to say to the legislature, do good work this session. Send them an email right there. Or take the last one, if you don't want to do the committee hearing part, you just see that there's a bill that you have strong feelings about. It's good, it's bad, or maybe it could be better, or you could make it less bad. You just want to give some comments about that bill. You can use that link right there. There's lots of things you can do right here off of this one page. Sure.
So if I decide that I want to participate and I want to write a comment to them, is it effective to say, I don't like this, or it's unconstitutional and leave it at that? Or is there a better way to craft that?
So if there were about 100 million of you saying that, it would probably be effective. But unless you don't have, if you don't have those sorts of numbers, you might need a little bit more meat into that argument. Or if you've got billions of dollars, maybe they'll pay attention if you just kind of do the thumbs up or thumbs down. But yeah, you have to articulate that, right? And again, you don't have to be a college professor or an attorney or an engineer. You just have to have a brain and willing to communicate your thoughts on it. Be as articulate as you feel like. be respectful and appropriate, right? I would give examples, but we're live streaming this and it's being recorded, so I can't use any, and my kids are here, so I can't use all my good examples. But if you said, hey, knucklehead, why are you being so stupid? Don't pass that bill. Probably not going to be the most effective thing. You could be productive and respectful in that message, and then after you send it, then you can rant and rave all you want in the privacy of your own home. So back to this website. There's more things that you can do. Right here, this little link on the left called Bill Information. This is where, what I would say, the other half of the magic for the public lies. So let's say that you want to know everything there is to know about this Senate Bill 5037. You would click on that link, and it could take you to all of the documents and that kind of stuff. There's also, let me go back. There's also, if you clicked on this and you put that bill number in, again, don't worry about the SB or the HB, don't worry about all the alphanumeric things ahead of it, just those 4 numbers in there. You could also sign in to testify on committee hearings for that bill. Now, you can't testify in a hearing that doesn't exist, so if we got on there today, it wouldn't let us do it because the legislature's not in session. If you tried to do it on a bill that has not been scheduled for a public hearing, not gonna do you any good. You can still look up the information, but that ability to sign in on a hearing will be gone.
Question.
Yeah.
Is a committee hearing and a public hearing the same thing or 2 different things?
Great question. So a public hearing is a type of committee hearing. The other type, there are 3 really. So when I call a committee meeting or a committee hearing, it could be a public hearing, meaning we want to accept comments from lobbyists, from members of the public, from anybody about a bill. That's one type. The second type is what we call an executive session, meaning we've heard what everybody who's not a legislator has to say about it. Now we're going to debate it as legislators, and we're going to do amendments and pass it if we bring it up for a vote. And the third one is called a work session. That's where it's not about any particular bill. They just kind of think of it like a study session of, hey, we're going to invite particular people who are experts in a field of study that we want to know about, like how much does it cost to put air conditioning in a middle school,
Right.
as an example.
Public only gets to comment on the public
On the
hearing.
public hearing part, absolutely, yep. So another thing that you could do over here is called find member information in rosters. Members, they're meaning members of the legislature, representatives in the House or senators in the Senate. And in there, it's a whole nother wealth of information. And I'll tell you, when every year when the legislature convenes, I go into this and I actually download most of this information so that I can get it even if I don't have access to the internet, because this is where a lot of the magical information is. So here's a list of legislators, what committees they're on, what districts they represent, what counties they serve, and who serves as their legislative assistant. One of the things that you have to remember is if you got, let's use Senator Short, we're gonna pick on her tonight. If you got on here and you got Senator Short's phone number and you called it, let's wait until Monday morning, Shelley Short is not gonna be the one answering that phone. It's gonna be her legislative assistant. That's I don't want to call them their gatekeepers. That's who helps them function, right? Because if a legislator's sitting there answering their own phone all day, they're not doing legislative stuff. It's incredibly important to be nice to those people too, right? They're all too often, I've seen people call and, oh, this is that stupid legislative assistant. I want to talk to somebody who really matters. Well, guess who's never talking to the senator now, right? Yeah, I mean, you got to be nice to those people too. They're not the ones who cast the votes, but they're the ones who decide how much access you have to the people who do. So within that link, these are the different things that I talked about, right? And you can get the rosters by House, by Senate, by both of them. You can sort them. You can download it into Excel. You can do all kinds of stuff with that. Hugely important. And I don't like the form emails that the legislative website has where you put in your information, you type in the box, and you click send, right? I want to load it up in my own Outlook and then send it so that I've got it that way. And this is where I do that, right? This very top one is, it gives you every legislator's email address and their legislative assistant's email address. And if you ever wonder who to send it to, both is the answer. Because everybody sends their email to the legislator. Very rarely do people send their email to the legislative assistant. Well, guess who flags things for the legislature, for the legislators? Guess who looks through their inbox to say, hey, representative, you got another email from James, you probably should pay attention to this one. It's their assistant. So I always copy unless I don't want the assistant to know, I always copy the assistant on there, because then they can go, hey, I see that I got copied on this. This is a constituent, or this is somebody that the legislator wants to hear from. I can flag that and make sure that they see it. So we were on that one. We can also find what the legislature calls standard information about legislators. We can find in-depth information about legislators. Again, you see the 4 different caucuses linked here. Each legislator has a legislative webpage, a nonpartisan webpage, that's the standard one. And they have a caucus webpage, which is more slanted toward their political party. That's this one that's circled now. And then you heard me talk about these forms to email legislators. You can check the box about which legislators you want to email and then do it that way. I much prefer just getting their email address and sending it to them like normal. So we were here about opportunities to influence during a committee hearing. This is what committee hearings look like. If nobody's ever seen it, this is what they look like. This is a Senate hearing room. These people who sit up at the top are senators in this case. This is somebody testifying here at what we call the table. We don't really call it anything. And then there are, and then kind of got carried away. And then there's, you only see the first kind of row and a half, but there's probably 24 or 36 rows where people can sit in the audience. And you could come, if you were so inclined, you could come to any legislative hearing and just go sit in it and watch. You can do that. It's an open legislature. These are your laws that they're enacting on your behalf. You have a right just to go watch and see what they're doing. You can do the same thing, frankly, in the gallery when the House or the Senate are convened together as a body. You can do that there. But if you were ever to go testify in person, you would sit in a chair like this, and they have this, you can see the little lights on both sides, and it's like a traffic light. When it's green, you've got plenty of time. When it's red, you go faster. And don't get caught talking past the, when it's yellow, go faster. Don't get caught running the red lights or talking past the red lights. And it is almost always the case. You can see here, this photo is actually fairly old, but you can see that 3 of the 6 who are there have their laptops open, and you can see the top of their laptop. Unfortunately, it feels like they're looking at other things on their laptop when I testify, unless I say something shocking, and then all their heads go, and they ask themselves, what did he just say? I missed something. That's just the reality of it. I choose to believe, I hope, that they're dutifully taking notes about what everybody's saying, and we're going to go with that theory. But that's what it looks like. If you were to testify in Zoom, it's just like a regular old Zoom call. You'd be put in what they call a waiting room, and then they would call your name, and staff like bump you up into this thing where they can actually hear you. You give your 3 minutes, and sometimes they have a clock that appears as like almost like another speaker there in the Zoom meeting. And then you give your testimony, and they wrap it up, and off you go. If you ever testify in the legislature, be nice, try to know what you're talking about, and just have fun. They're normal people. They're normal people. It doesn't have to be anything special. So executive sessions, after a bill has had a public hearing, it must be scheduled for an executive session in order to be eligible to pass. They do not bring up bills for executive session that they do not intend to pass. Executive sessions are where legislators get to propose, debate amendments, vote on amendments, and then vote on whether or not they like the bill. They think it should pass into law as a committee. And there's 4 different ways that they can cast their vote. They can cast it what we would normally think of as yes. They call it a do pass recommendation. A do pass as amended, meaning I like this bill, but only because we did the amendments on it, so I support the amended version of that bill. It's like a no vote, do not pass, or without recommendation, saying, you know what, I'm still really not sure. I could see both sides on this bill. I'm gonna abstain from the vote. I'm gonna vote without recommendation. And again, with rare exceptions, bills do not get brought up for votes unless they intend to pass them. Again, opportunities to influence here, right? The chair has to schedule it for an executive session, and the chair needs the votes. So if you've talked to every other legislator on the committee and you've got their commitment that they don't like the bill or that they do like the bill, now you can start to control what they do. Again, amendments to bills is an opportunity to influence it. Even if you don't like a bill, You can make it less bad by proposing amendments. If you do like a bill, you can make it more better by proposing amendments to it, and the committee process is the part to do that. And again, everybody needs the votes, right? At the end of the day, the viewpoint with the most votes decides a bill's future. So I talked about fiscal committees. Those are the green bolded ones. If a bill has a financial or a fiscal impact to the state, and sometimes they care about local governments, it also has to go to a fiscal committee. So we kind of delineate the policy of a bill, regardless of how much it costs, from the financial impacts of a bill, regardless of how good it says, or how good it feels according to the language of the bill. And so in that case, bills have to pass their policy committee and their fiscal committee, which if you're running a very expensive bill that is both policy and has a fiscal impact, now you've doubled your workload, you've more than doubled the amount of votes that you need to get for it, and the time that it takes. That process is the same as in policy committees. There's just more focus on the financial impact. Again, we see lots of opportunities to influence. If I really don't like the policy of a bill, but it's a difficult thing to communicate in a political setting, sometimes maybe I'll lobby against the bill using its fiscal impact. This is just too expensive, right? It seems like we're coming in on a slowing economy. The legislature needs to reserve its funding rather than spending $100 million on giving everybody a puppy, right? We love puppies, but we just don't have the money to do it. That's an opportunity to influence the legislation. If you don't like a bill, it having to go to a fiscal committee is a great blessing in disguise, because now you've got another opportunity to muck with it and to erode the support for that bill. And again, the focus of fiscal committees is more on the financial impact. So I'm not really going to talk about fiscal notes tonight, but if you've ever heard somebody talk about a fiscal note for a bill, that's how the state legislature articulates, guesses, the financial impact of a bill on the state and the different state agencies within it and local governments. And this you can see is the fiscal note from that bill that you've got on your handout here. So I'm also not going to touch beyond this slide on the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is really the leadership of both the House and the Senate. It's not in each chamber, right? The Senate has their Rules Committee and the House has the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee is truly a gatekeeper to prevent certain bills from passing the legislative process where really nobody can be blamed for it. That's the most basic explanation. And it's made up of leadership of the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus of that chamber. It does not have any it does not have any hearings. It doesn't take public testimony. It doesn't consider amendments to bills. They really don't debate much. They come together, they pick a few bills to move on in the process, and they vote, and then they adjourn. And that's about as much public input as happens into that process. So you heard us before talk about caucuses as a noun, right? Think the team that Democrats belong to and the team that Republicans belong to. Now we're going to talk about caucuses as a verb, and we use that. The legislature is caucusing. They're about to caucus on a bill. That's like, think of it as a team meeting. So bills that come out of the Rules Committee to the second reading calendar, we remember first reading, second reading, third reading. Bills that come out of the Rules Committee, they've been through the Policy Committee. If they have a fiscal impact, they go to a fiscal committee too. They get to the Rules Committee where the leadership kind of decides which ones they want to move on. Now the caucuses happen where they will caucus on a bill, meaning our team's going to get together and talk about what we think about that bill, and your team's going to get together and talk about what you think about it. And if we're on the majority, if we've got more of those circles in our color, we get to decide what happens with that bill. We get to decide what amendments are going to be approved or rejected on the bill. We get to decide who's going to speak on the bill and for how long. All of that stuff. Sometimes it feels like it's scripted when the legislature retreats to caucus, because unlike all of the other part of the legislative process, which is open, you can watch it on TVW, you can watch it on the legislature's website, you don't get to see what happens in caucus. Legislators don't get to talk about what happens in caucus. Now, sometimes you can get them to share a little bit, but they never say who, they rarely say why or what. And this is, for me, this is the frustrating part, because this is a black hole that frankly only the legislature can do. Any other part of state government or local government, it's a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. The legislature is not subject to that. And those are those decisions that they make while they're in caucus. So our bill gets out of caucus, right? Each chamber or each party has caucused on our bill. They have their plan about, let's stick with the air conditioning. They have a plan about requiring air conditioning in this middle school. It returns to the chamber for that second reading process. And the chamber now has recommendations, usually in the form of amendments to a bill. So maybe our bill on air conditioning, it comes to the Energy and Environment Committee, and the bill has a recommended substitute or a new version that says, yes, we should put air conditioning in that building, but it needs to be renewable energy, or it needs to be coal burning only, or something along those lines, right? Those could be some of the amendments that would be offered for that bill. And then those are debated and voted on in second reading as an entire body of the House or the Senate, depending on whether it's a House bill or a Senate bill. And that's the point that I just said. So now, again, think way back in the day. First reading, take a break, 24 hours, really understand what it is they're talking about. Second reading is the opportunity to debate and perfect a bill, and we'll take another break, let it sink in, make sure we're ready to make this decision. You come back for third reading, and it's a yay or nay vote, up or down. Yes, that bill, as it stands right now, should be enacted into law. And that's where that part happens. Bills that pass third reading. So let's use our Senate Bill 5037 here. After it gets through all of that process, and it passes the Senate, we're halfway done. Now that bill goes to the House, and it does the exact same process over. And that bill has to pass both chambers in the exact idea. Every comma, every capital letter, everything needs to read, even if it means the same, but it doesn't read the same, doesn't count. It's got to go back, and it has to pass them both in the exact opposite way. And sometimes, we call these concurrence, right? Each chamber needs to concur with the other's amendments. Sometimes concurrence disputes can be a thing. I've watched bills, including this 2024 legislative session, survive for 57, 58 days. The House wants to pass it, the Senate wants to pass it, but they have different ideas about how to do it. They agree on the goal, but they couldn't work out the exact same language, and they were fighting back and forth. The bill was bouncing from the House to the Senate. No, we like our version better. No, we like our version better. Well, they never fixed it. They never figured it out by the time the day 60 ran around. Bill died, didn't pass. So concurrence disputes can be a thing. This is a terrible nightmare when you're the one trying to get that bill passed into law. And it's fantastic when you're the one who opposes the bill. Because remember, in this circumstance, the bill's already passed both chambers. Both the House and the Senate have said, yep, we'll do it. Let's make that sucker a law. And you're standing there going, no. But if all you've got to hold on to is a concurrence dispute, you betcha, I'll make it a concurrence dispute. So this is my best attempt at a graphic representation. So as if this process wasn't complicated enough, we also have the dimension of time that we have to overlay here. So if you think the top end, the broad part of the triangle, as the beginning of legislative session and the number of bills that are introduced, usually about 2,500 bills between the House and the Senate each year, each session. As we get farther down into session, the number of live bills starts to narrow. And these lines represent what we call cutoff dates. So these are, think of them as benchmarks that bills have to meet at different points of the timeline of the legislative process in order to remain alive. There have been plenty of bills that everybody loves or says that they love, but it doesn't meet that timeline. It doesn't meet a certain part in the process by a certain date. Bill's dead, doesn't matter. This is what this is the cutoff calendar for the 2024 legislative session. And you see, so we started January 8th, and bills need to be out of their policy committee by January 31st. That's a pretty good, 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks of time. But then you fast forward here, there are bills that are like 5 days, right? That just like in, oop, went the wrong way. Just like in this, those timelines get shorter and shorter and shorter, which our blood pressure goes higher and higher and higher when we get through that. So let's say that our bill passes the House and it passes the Senate and it passes the identical version and it passes according to all of those timeline benchmarks. Now we got to deal with the governor, right? This is the bully pulpit. That's what that's supposed to be. So the governor always gets it first and last. The governor is an incredibly powerful position in the state legislative process if the governor chooses to use their power in that way. Some legislators really care about the legislative process. Some really don't care at all. They just like to go to the press conference. And of course, others land anywhere along the middle. So the governor has a power of bully pulpit. The governor can call a press conference at any time, and there are always there used to be at least half a dozen reporters around today who will always go and cover mostly what the governor's talking about. The governor gets the ability to ask for what we call executive requested bills. So it's not just any bill, and it doesn't have any legal meaning whatsoever, but the governor could say, this is an executive request legislation. The governor himself or herself asked for it. State agencies can also do this. Independently elected officials like the Attorney General can do this, Lieutenant Governor, the Insurance Commissioner, those sorts of things. But it's an added layer of power. The governor also gets the first budget proposal of every legislative session. The governor always proposes a budget, and that kind of sets the political expectation for the legislature and a baseline that the legislature is going to try to generally match or at least be close to. And again, the governor also has the power of the veto. Now, here is a huge difference between the governor of Washington and the president of the US as it relates to veto. When we get to this part of the legislative process, let's say that our bill passes, then the talk amongst lobbyists, people who do this for a living like I do, is now we need to go meet with the governor and make sure that he or she signs our bill. And for me, the answer is absolutely not. I don't care whether the governor signs our bill, because the president of the United States, the president has what we call the power of the pocket veto. And that is what happens if they do nothing. At the federal level, the president must sign a bill for it to become law. The president can veto the bill and prevent it, or the president can do nothing, which is equivalent to a veto. In Washington, it's the opposite. If the governor signs a bill, it has the same legal effect as doing nothing. So I don't care if the governor signs the bill or not, if I like it. I care if the governor's talking about vetoing the bill, if I like it. Or if I don't like it, I'm going to start talking to the governor's office about a potential veto. And all that power rests exclusively with the governor. And the governor can call a special session. The legislature can call a special session. It requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature to do that. And it's hard for them to vote to call themselves back into session when they're not in session to vote to call themselves back into a session. Questions or comments about this is by far the longest section and the biggest meat. Any giant questions that call out here?
Makes your job seem simple.
Yes. Yeah, super simple. Did you have a question?
I don't know if I should wait until later.
Throw it out now. If I don't answer it, I'm going to try to make up an answer as we go. Okay.
Senate and House, let's say they both pass a law, and it's awaiting, and the governor signs both of them, but they differ a little bit. We had that situation with wholesale internet providers being allowed to become their own retailers, and our county has a unique situation in that regard, and everybody is waiting which one is going to now prevail. And like the rumor was, basically the governor signed both of them simultaneously, right hand, left hand kind of thing. And I've never been able to find a determination which one prevails, because they differ just slightly enough that our wholesale provider does not feel comfortable moving forward, going ahead with following it and implementing it. So it's basically stuck in limbo, even though they've been signed. What happens now?
Yeah, so the technical term for that is a problem. And that's happened more than once, ironically. I remember it happened about 5 years ago with two pieces of legislation about domestic violence. And the legislature was so excited, I'm gonna sit down because my foot's hurting. The legislature was so excited to pass a bill, they passed two of them and they read differently. And at the time, the governor liked both bills. Governor didn't want to be seen as vetoing good bills about domestic violence. So the governor signed them both, and I don't go to bill signings, but allegedly the governor tried to do this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's actually true, but it makes for a great story. I don't know. I can tell you what happened with those two DV bills. If we looked them up today in law, or in the RCW, there's two versions of it. Both of them are in place today. Both of them give opposite direction to every law enforcement officer about what to do in a case of in a very certain circumstance about domestic violence calls. It's great.
Isn't there any, I mean, in other states, they actually have things on the books that say that one law or code cannot violate or oppose another code. We don't have that in Washington?
Yeah, well, I mean, we do actually, the process that we have to resolve those kind of disputes is the court system. And I think at the end of the day, now, nobody has seen it worth their while to go litigate those two DV conflicting statutes, but I would imagine at some point, in the situation that you're talking about, somebody's just got to litigate it to get a judge to say, this is the one that counts.
Okay.
Yeah. It's job security for attorneys. Yeah, and people like me. Go ahead.
All right, a 2-minute stretch break.
2-minute stretch break?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that.
Thank you.